For years of defying the world had forged their love into something fierce and brilliant, a wildfire that consumed everything in its path. Now, after 4 years, the fire was out. Only embers and ash remained. Their story had become a book read too many times, its pages softened and worn, filled with memories but incapable of offering a new chapter. He knew it was time for the end when, for the 7th morning in a row, Julian left for work without kissing him goodbye. Leo had been sitting on the sofa for an hour when Julian was due home. The screen of his phone had brightened and dimmed a dozen times. He stared at their message thread. The last text, from Julian at 5:45 p.m., was stark. Working late. Don't wait up for dinner. There was no emoji, no explanation, not even his name. This kind of brevity had become the new normal in recent months. Leo's eyes burned as he stared at the words, the admission settling deep in his bones that they hadn't truly talked in a long time. Not about bills or groceries or taking out the recycling, but a real conversation. When they first got together, words were a torrent they could barely contain, holding each other through entire nights, whispering about everything and nothing. The sky, their dreams, their fears, the most fragile secrets hidden in their hearts. Now, Julian needed to steel himself with a few cigarettes in his car before he could even face coming inside. Leo had seen him just a little while ago when he went down to the garage with the recycling. He spotted the familiar sedan parked in a visitor spot, engine off. The window was cracked just enough for a ribbon of gray smoke to curl out. In the dim, flickering light of the garage, he saw Julian's head tilted back against the headrest. A half-smoked cigarette was pinched between the fingers of his right hand. His left hand rested on the steering wheel, a single finger tapping a nervous, unconscious rhythm against the worn leather. His face was a mask of exhaustion, his features slack with a weariness that seemed to go deeper than bone. He took a long, slow drag from the cigarette, holding it in before letting it out in a heavy cloud that swirled around him, a tangible manifestation of his sorrows. Leo clutched the plastic bin, wondering how long he had been sitting there. An hour? 2? He felt a pang of suspicion, asking himself if Julian's supposed late nights at the office were just an excuse to avoid coming home. He wondered how many evenings Julian had spent like this, alone in the silence of his car. A hot, angry impulse surged through him to run over, to rip away the pretense and demand an explanation. He wanted to scream, to ask why sitting in a cold car was better than being home with him, to ask what had gone so terribly wrong between them. But in the end, he just turned slowly, walking around the car to the recycling bins, his body heavy with the knowledge that he didn't have the strength to hear the answer. The sound of the keypad at the front door broke the silence. Leo quickly put his phone down and woke his laptop from its long sleep, arranging his face into a mask of concentration, pretending to be lost in the design project he'd been stuck on for days. Julian entered, bringing a chill of the night air with him. He dropped his briefcase on the entryway table. His eyes flickered towards Leo, a brief moment of surprise in them. His voice was raspy, likely from the cigarettes, as he asked why Leo was sitting in the dark. Leo forced a smile, reporting that he was just looking for inspiration. Julian walked past him, and a cloying, heavy scent of cologne followed in his wake. In recent months, his late nights had been accompanied by a new password on his phone and the smell of a scent he never used to wear. He must have used it to cover the smoke, because he knew Leo hated the smell and had asked him not to. The realization should have been a thunderclap, but it landed with a dull thud. Leo's fingers dug into his palms, but he resolved not to confront him. Instead, he met his gaze and opened his arms, his voice soft with feigned concern as he asked if Julian was tired from working so late. Julian's eyelashes fluttered. He hesitated for a long moment before completely ignoring the offered embrace and heading straight for the bathroom. He said he was going to take a shower and that Leo should go to bed. The bathroom door clicked shut, and the sound of running water was an immediate and impenetrable wall, cutting off any possibility of conversation. Leo turned his head mechanically, his gaze falling on the laptop screen. The project displayed there had been stagnant for a week. It was a branding campaign for a new couples therapy service. The irony was suffocating. Their own relationship felt like a case study for it. Once they were inseparable, their passion a force against the world. They had survived their family's outrage and the poverty that followed being cast out. They were so sure then that they would be together forever. It seems such a naive concept now. Forever. In reality, it only took 4 years, just over 1,000 days, for a burning love to cool into a lukewarm broth. He was beginning to understand that the most tragic ending wasn't a dramatic separation, but the slow, quiet decay where one person still remembered every detail of why they fell in love but could no longer feel a thing for the other. The deepest betrayal wasn't that he had changed his mind, but that he was simply tired. The shower ran for 20 minutes, longer than usual. Leo knew Julian was stalling, waiting for him to fall asleep, to avoid him. Staring at the blurred silhouette through the frosted glass, Leo's mind drifted back 4 years, to when they were first thrown out and living in a cramped, damp studio apartment. They would squeeze into the tiny shower stall together, kissing in the billowing steam until the water ran cold. Back then, they couldn't afford a decent mattress, yet life felt full of sweetness and hope. Now they had a spacious apartment and stable jobs, but they had lost all interest in sharing each other's worlds. Even the simple acts of showering or eating together had become luxuries they could no longer afford. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it all started to unravel. Before he could find an answer, a tear splashed onto the keyboard. He fumbled for a tissue, his hand shaking as he wiped it away. The water in the bathroom was still running. A bitter smile touched his lips as he closed the laptop, went to the bedroom and slid into bed, feigning sleep. Half an hour later, Julian crept into the room, smelling of soap. He sat at the desk, took a couple of pills from a bottle, and replied to a few messages on his phone before finally lying down beside Leo. He didn't move to hold him as he always had before. He lay on the far edge of the bed, his back to Leo. The space between them felt vast enough to contain all the years they had been in love. It dawned on Leo with a sudden, painful clarity that it had been a long, long time since they had been intimate. They had once made love on this bed, in the kitchen, on the sofa, in every corner of their home. Now, Julian wouldn't even hold him as they slept. Leo's voice trembled as he called out his name, his request a quiet plea for them to make love. The only response was the sudden stillness of Julian's breathing. He didn't answer, didn't move. The silence was suffocating, a slow and steady collapse. Leo abandoned his pride, wrapping his arms around Julian's waist and sliding a hand under his shirt. As his fingers began to explore, Julian abruptly sat up and shoved him away with a startling force. Leo tumbled off the bed, his leg hitting the cold hardwood floor. A sharp, searing pain shot through him. It was a familiar pain, a reminder of the leg that had never fully healed. When their relationship was discovered, Leo's father, in a drunken rage, had pushed him down a flight of stairs. The sickening crack of bone against the steps still echoed in his nightmares. Despite surgeries and physical therapy, he could walk, but he couldn't run or stand for too long. Julian had always been so careful with his leg, so terrified of him getting hurt, he would carry him around their apartment as if he were made of glass. Now, to avoid his touch, he had pushed him away, so easily, so forcefully, as if casting off something repulsive. The pain in his leg was sharp, but the pain in his heart was a deeper, blunter agony. He looked at Julian in disbelief. Julian stared back for a few seconds, as if waking from a trance, before scrambling to help him back onto the bed. His face was obscured by his long eyelashes, which cast a shadow over his eyes, hiding any emotion. His apology was a hoarse whisper, claiming he was just too tired lately. Leo clutched the comforter, looking at Julian's averted eyes, and finally asked the question he had been dreading. He asked if Julian still loved him. The question hung in the air, and Julian's expression froze. He remained silent, but his silence was an answer in itself. Leo's mind went blank. He just stared, unblinking. Julian never looked at him. After a moment, he announced he was going to sleep in the guest room and left, the closing door stirring a cold draft in the room. Leo listened to his footsteps fade down the hall before collapsing back onto the bed, an empty, hollowed-out feeling in his chest. He stared at the ceiling as memories of them flickered through his mind like an old film, feeling as distant as if they had happened in another lifetime. He kept asking himself where they had gone wrong. How had the man who was willing to give up his family, his fortune, and his future for him become so cold and distant in just 4 years? How had his love, once a torrent, dwindled to nothing, like sand slipping through an hourglass? He knew the truth now. Julian was tired. He regretted it. But the most painful part was that Leo was still deeply in love with him. Julian had made him feel alive, had filled every second of his life with passion. He had become a part of his soul. He had never imagined, could never imagine, a future without him. He bit his lip until he tasted blood, whispering Julian's name into the darkness, before finally closing his eyes and letting the tears fall. His brother, his lover, his betrayer. He made a silent promise that if Julian regretted their life together, he would let him go. The next morning, the sound of a spatula hitting a pan woke him. Leo walked barefoot into the kitchen to see Julian at the stove, wearing the navy blue apron Leo had bought him. The ties were knotted loosely at his waist, accentuating how thin he had become. A wave of nostalgia washed over Leo. It felt like the early days when Julian would cook for him every day. Julian turned, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw Leo. He told him to go get ready, that breakfast was almost done. Leo could barely recognize the smile on Julian's face. It was like a poorly fitting mask, artificial and strained. But Leo saw the dark circles under his eyes and knew he hadn't slept either. He decided not to call him out on the pretense. Julian was trying to love him again, or at least he was performing the act of loving him. The performance was clumsy, unconvincing. Leo had seen him when he was truly, passionately in love, and this wasn't it. Still, he walked over and wrapped his arms around Julian's waist from behind. He whispered that he loved him, that he always would. Julian's body tensed for a second, a slight tremor running through him, a subtle rejection of his touch. Leo took the hint and let go. Breakfast was an elaborate affair. Golden scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, toast, sliced fruit, and a steaming mug of coffee. Leo took a bite of the eggs and smiled at Julian, telling him it was delicious and thanking him. Julian seemed to exhale in relief, then sat down opposite him and began to eat. They ate in silence, two machines executing a shared breakfast protocol. As if suddenly aware of the awkwardness, Julian started to make small talk. He mentioned that the building management was power washing the exterior walls that afternoon, reminding Leo to close the windows. Leo nodded. Julian then added that the jasmine on the balcony needed to be repotted and asked if he could pick up some soil on his way home from work. The conversation bounced back and forth like a ping-pong ball, each of them carefully avoiding any topic that might lead to a real discussion. They were partners in a play, acting out a scene where everything was fine. It was clear Julian was a bad actor. His expression was tense throughout the meal. As they were finishing, he said Leo's name, his voice barely audible. It was the name his stepfather, Julian's father, had forced on him. When his father married into the Vance family, he had changed Leo's last name to theirs as a sign of fealty. It had been a futile gesture. A few years later, after Leo and Julian's relationship came to light, his stepfather was disowned along with them. The Vance family hated him. His own father hated him more. But at the time, he didn't care. He had Julian, and Julian would love him forever. But now, he wondered if Julian was starting to hate him too. If it weren't for him, Julian would still be the celebrated heir to the Vance fortune. He wouldn't be struggling to make ends meet, enduring the whispers and glares of others, or smoking alone in his car at night, silently swallowing his bitterness. He was supposed to be above all this, untouched by the grime of the world. It was Leo who had pulled him down, who had ruined his life. The thought brought a sharp sting to his eyes. He steadied himself before asking Julian what was wrong. Julian's eyes wavered, and he forced another smile. He said it was nothing, he just wanted to say his name. After a moment, he added that they should go to the grocery store together after work, promising to make Leo's favorite pasta for dinner over the weekend. Leo's eyes lit up. He thought that maybe their love wasn't gone, just buried under the weight of everyday life. Maybe if they tried, they could get back to how they were. As Julian was leaving for work, he leaned down and gave Leo a quick, feather-light kiss on the forehead. "See you tonight," he said. Leo sat by the window, a gentle breeze on his skin, the sunlight warm. He was filled with hope. He thought today would be a special day. But he wasn't met with Julian coming home from work. He was met with a catastrophe, a blow that would shatter their fragile peace. By 7 o'clock, Julian wasn't home and hadn't sent a message. Leo tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. He managed to get in touch with one of Julian's co-workers, who told him Julian had left hours ago, in such a rush that he had knocked over a stack of files on his way out. That wasn't like Julian. Something was wrong. Just then, a message popped up on his phone from Julian's cousin. It was a link to a video. "You should hear what Julian is saying," the message read. Leo opened it. The video showed Julian kneeling by his mother's hospital bed, his face pale and dazed. He was repeating the words, "Mom, I regret it." The cousin's texts continued to flood in. "He regrets it. Too little, too late. My aunt already had her will notarized. He's not getting a dime. For years of living like trash with you, and he's lost all of that old Vance arrogance. He's like a pathetic dog. He's probably been regretting it for years. This is what you faggots deserve. Just you wait. He's gonna dump you any day now." Leo ignored the taunts and typed back one question. "What hospital?" The cousin seemed surprised. "You dare to show your face?" Leo didn't hesitate. He had faced down his family, his friends, the world. He had nothing left to fear. His patience wore thin. "Just give me the room number," he typed. The cousin sent the address, followed by more insults. "Shameless. I hope you get to see for yourself just how much he regrets ever meeting you." The hospital corridor seemed endless, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air. The door to the room was ajar, and a group of people were gathered around the bed. Leo recognized some of Julian's relatives, a doctor, and a few other somber-looking adults. He knew none of them wanted him there, so he stayed back, hidden from their view. He watched them, their expressions of grief looking hollow and performative. Only Julian's sorrow was real. He was kneeling by the bed, his back hunched, looking like an old man. The person who was truly grieving was the one they had all cast out. His mother's voice was a weak, rusty blade cutting through the air. "Get out. I don't need your crocodile tears. I wish I'd never given birth to a freak like you. Why don't you?" "Justi." A stunned silence fell over the room. Julian's body went rigid. For a moment, Leo thought he had turned to stone, so fragile he might crumble at the slightest touch. He wanted to rush in, to cover Julian's ears, but he couldn't move. She was dying. What was the point? Julian began to bow his head, his forehead hitting the metal bed frame with a dull, rhythmic thud. "Mom, I was wrong. I was wrong." Each apology was punctuated by a harder impact. "I'm not your mother. Get out." Her hand, thin and frail, pointed towards the door before falling back onto the sheets. The heart monitor let out a long, piercing wail. A nurse stepped forward and announced the time of death. His mother's eyes remained open, her final gaze fixed on Julian, filled not with peace, but with a deep, abiding hatred. As a nurse gently closed her eyes and pulled a white sheet over her face, Leo finally pushed his way through the crowd and knelt behind Julian, wrapping his arms around him. Julian's body was shaking violently, his shirt soaked with cold sweat. Leo touched his face. It was wet with tears and blood. Julian stared at the white sheet, his lips still moving silently. "Mom, I was wrong." But there was no one left to hear him. After the body was taken away, Julian's cousin walked over to them, his expression one of pure contempt. "Happy now? She died without ever forgiving you." Leo wanted to stand up and punch him, but Julian was a dead weight in his arms, his pupils dilated, his breathing shallow. His fingers were clenched tightly around Leo's shirt, like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. Leo held him tighter, his own voice trembling as he promised to take him home. Julian didn't go to the funeral. His uncle had told him not to come, not to taint his sister's path in the afterlife. Instead, Julian watched from a hill far away as the procession made its way to the cemetery. He didn't cry, but when he got home, he sat in the living room in complete darkness for hours, staring at nothing. The night grew cold, and Leo gently draped a blanket over his shoulders. Julian flinched as if startled, jumping to his feet and causing Leo to stumble back onto the sofa. He looked at Leo, a brief flash of confusion on his face, but he didn't move to help him. Leo understood. The grief was a thick fog, and he couldn't see through it. He wouldn't blame him. He pulled himself up and tugged on Julian's sleeve, asking if he could hold him. Julian's gaze slowly came into focus, and he looked at Leo without speaking. Leo took his silence as consent, rising to wrap his arms around his waist and rest his head against his chest. He couldn't stop his own eyes from welling up. Julian was so much thinner. He could feel the sharp edges of his spine, the jut of his ribs. His fingers trembled, so he held on tighter, whispering that he would always be there for him. Julian's heart skipped a beat, and he finally raised his arms, pulling Leo into an embrace. They stood like that for a long time in silence. Then Julian spoke his name again, so softly. "Leo." He waited for what would come next, but nothing did. He assumed it was like before, that Julian just needed to say his name. Or maybe there were words trapped inside him that he couldn't bring himself to say. It didn't matter. He knew their relationship was a minefield of unspoken truths. They tiptoed around the issues, pretending they weren't there, but the wall between them was real and growing higher every day. He didn't care. He would play dumb forever if it meant keeping Julian by his side. But Julian, it seemed, was done pretending. He released his hold on Leo, and as he turned to leave, he murmured, "Maybe we were a mistake from the beginning." The next day, Julian made breakfast again. A pot of oatmeal and 2 slices of toast. They ate in silence, neither of them mentioning his words from the night before, another unspoken agreement to pretend nothing had happened. When Julian was ready to leave for work, Leo walked him to the door and handed him his briefcase. As Julian turned to go, Leo caught his sleeve. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Julian paused, then leaned in and gave him a perfunctory kiss on the forehead, a dismissive gesture. When Julian had spoken those words the night before, Leo knew it was the beginning of the end. But a small part of him clung to hope. Maybe Julian was just tired. Maybe it was a momentary lapse. They had sacrificed so much to be together. It couldn't all be for nothing. They were supposed to grow old together, to die in each other's arms. Even if the love had decayed, they should be able to hold each other in the ashes. He told himself that as long as Julian was willing to stay, he would keep up the charade. Julian came home drunk, stumbling through the door. As Leo rushed to help him, he lurched into the bathroom and was violently ill. His suit jacket was spattered with bile. When Leo reached out to help him take it off, Julian shoved him away hard. "Don't touch me." Leo stumbled back against the wall, stunned. In vino veritas. The truth in wine. Was his touch really that repulsive to Julian now? He backed out of the bathroom with a bitter taste in his mouth. He prepared a glass of water and some aspirin and left it on the nightstand in the guest room, where Julian had been sleeping ever since that night. He went back to their bedroom and sat in the dark. A message from his agent popped up. "Hey, have you finished the ending yet? The readers are getting impatient." He typed back an apology, claiming he still had writer's block. It was a lie. He knew how the story ended. He just couldn't bring himself to write it. He sat at his laptop, but the words wouldn't come. Hours later, he heard a crash from the guest room. He hurried over to find Julian asleep, his brow furrowed in a troubled dream. Leo reached out to smooth the lines on his forehead but stopped just short of touching him. He was afraid of waking him, afraid of his rejection. He stood there for a moment before noticing Julian's phone on the floor. He picked it up. The screen was still on, displaying a text conversation with someone named Dr. Evans along with several images. It was a picture from a work dinner. In one, Julian was sitting next to a woman in an elegant blue dress. She was leaning in, saying something to him, and Julian was smiling. It was a genuine, relaxed smile, the kind Leo hadn't seen in months. A sharp pang of jealousy went through him. Why was Julian smiling at her like that? But then he reasoned with himself. Of course he was. She and Julian were from the same world. Professional, sophisticated, successful. Not like Leo, a freelance writer who spent his days in Julian's old t-shirts. He remembered Julian mentioning her once. She was a childhood friend. If she hadn't gone abroad for her doctorate, maybe Julian would never have ended up with him. If he had never come into Julian's life, Julian would probably be happy now. Just then, Julian mumbled in his sleep, "Leo, go far away." So he was the nightmare. Leo went and sat on the sofa in the living room, the first piece of furniture they had ever bought together. They had hauled it from a second-hand store to save money, and Julian had scraped his arm carrying it up the stairs. That night, they had made love on it, carefully, Julian terrified of putting too much weight on his injured leg. Over the years, despite their care, the cushions had sagged, the fabric had worn thin. It was a perfect metaphor for their relationship. They had tried to fix it once, taking it to an upholsterer who made it look brand new. So when their love started to fail, Leo thought it could be repaired too. He had forgotten that love isn't a piece of furniture. You can't just patch it up. The only thing holding them together now was not love, but the weight of their shared sacrifices. The careers they had given up, the families they had lost, the fearless defiance of their youth. To give up now would make a mockery of it all. It was too much to lose. So they stayed together, picking at a tasteless meal, resentment growing between them. It shouldn't be like this. Love should be about love. So he made a decision. It's over. They had burned down every bridge to be together, and in the wasteland of public opinion, they had grown a rose garden. Now the flowers were dead, and only thorns remained. The ending was a sad one, but he didn't blame Julian. He had burned so brightly for him for so long. He would let him go. He would be the one to end it. Sitting there in the darkness, Leo finally wrote the ending for the couple in his story, an ending that mirrored his own. He went to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the back of the closet. Taped to the side was a faded sticky note from a trip they took years ago. In Julian's handwriting, it read, "Leo's treasure chest." The corners were curled and yellowed, like a dead leaf. He peeled it off and threw it in the trash. He began to pack, his movements mechanical. A beige sweater Julian said he liked. A gray cashmere scarf from his last birthday. Everything held a memory of him. Even their socks were matching sets. He wasn't going to keep any of it, but he had to pack it up, get it out of Julian's life. When he got to the framed photo on the nightstand, he paused. It was from a day at the state fair. Julian's arm was around his shoulder, and they were both grinning under a sky filled with fireworks. He traced the outline of their faces on the glass before turning it face down and putting it in a drawer. 4 years of a life together barely filled a single suitcase. When he wheeled the suitcase into the living room, Julian was standing by the door. His eyes flickered to the suitcase, his gaze lingering for a moment on the spot where the sticky note used to be. Leo knew he didn't need to say a word. Julian understood. But his face was blank, his expression unreadable. He simply turned and went into the kitchen. "Have breakfast before you go," he said quietly. He made the same breakfast he had on their first date. Poached eggs, toast with blueberry jam, and 2 mugs of hot coffee. They sat at opposite ends of the table and ate in silence. When they were finished, Leo stood up and thanked him. As he walked to the door, Julian suddenly grabbed his wrist. But just as quickly, he let go. His throat worked for a moment, and then all he said was, "Be safe." Leo nodded. As the elevator doors closed, he thought he saw Julian's eyes turn red. His voice, muffled by the closing doors, seemed to say, "Goodbye, Leo." Leo whispered his own goodbye to the closed doors. "Goodbye, Julian." He went to a small coastal town in Oregon, a place Julian had once promised to take him. The promise had become one of many next times that never came. Next time we'll see that movie. Next time we'll visit your old college campus. All the next times had drifted away like seeds on the wind, never finding fertile ground. He shook his head. They were over. Why was he still thinking about him? He could do things on his own. He could still have a good life. The air was damp and salty. The owner of the guest house he was staying at was a friendly woman who gave him the room with the best view. Through the wooden window frame, he could see the gray-blue ocean and hear the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks. He lay on the bed, listening to the tide, trying to empty his mind. The next day, he rented a bicycle and rode along the coastline with no destination in mind. The wind filled his shirt, and for a few moments he felt free. In the afternoon, he explored the old town with its rain-slicked cobblestone streets. A record store was playing a familiar old song, and he thought of Julian again. What was he doing? Did he ever think of him? He stood outside the shop until the song ended, then slowly rode back to the guest house. That night, the owner brought him a cup of tea and told him there would be a meteor shower. He sat on the balcony to wait, but as he stared out at the dark ocean, he was overcome with a wave of grief and began to sob. Before he went to sleep, he saw a message from his agent. She was asking him to reconsider the ending of his book. Readers wanted a happy ending, she said. It was too sad for the couple to go through so much only to part ways before their happy ending. Sad. That was the word she used. But wasn't that how most relationships ended? Not with a bang, but a whimper. That was reality. He didn't reply. His writing partner, Alex, was one of the few people who supported his ending. He understood the unspoken sadness in his writing. He said, if a relationship has lost its flavor, why force yourself to swallow the last bite? He felt the cold ashes of a dead fire were more permanent, more real, than the fleeting heat of the flame. After chatting for a while, Alex, perhaps sensing something in his words, announced he was flying out to join him. Alex was a talker, and his presence brought a new energy to the trip. He could make the most mundane things sound fascinating. In his photos, Leo saw a world he had overlooked. The peeling paint on an old wall, a wind chime swaying under an eave, an old cat sunning itself in an alley. The journey became more vibrant. After they had traveled through a few cities together, Leo woke up one morning and realized he hadn't dreamed of Julian in a long time. He eventually settled in a small town, living a quiet life. He slept late, wrote a little, and spent his afternoons in an old tea house, watching the old men play chess. His days were simple and he was content. On the winter solstice, he posted on social media for the first time in months. The night is long, but the day is reborn. A new chapter begins. A notification popped up. Julian had liked his post. A second later, it was gone. Leo froze. Julian hadn't contacted him once since he left. Was this his way of congratulating him? He wondered if Julian had started his new chapter, too. Was he happy? Was he with her? A dull ache spread through his chest, and he had to admit that he wasn't over him. The love and the pain had only been buried, not resolved. He still loved him. With a trembling hand, he clicked on Julian's profile. It was still blank. A small, selfish part of him was relieved. He wanted Julian to be happy, but he wanted him to be happy somewhere he couldn't see it. That night, the carefully constructed walls around his heart crumbled, and Julian was in his dreams again. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, a thick, inky darkness behind him. The wind whipped his hair back from his face, revealing eyes that were weary beyond measure. His voice was carried away by the wind, but Leo heard him. "Live a good life, Leo. I love you." As the last word left his lips, he fell backward into the abyss. Leo lunged forward, his hands grasping at empty air, as he watched Julian's body disappear into the churning waves below. He bolted upright, drenched in a cold sweat. He fumbled for his phone. It was 1:17 a.m. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it would break through his ribs. He had had a dream like this once before. He had dreamt that Julian was dying, telling him he was sorry he couldn't take care of him. The next day, Julian had collapsed from exhaustion and almost died. What did this dream mean? Why did he look so relieved as he fell? Rain began to beat against the window pane, a dark premonition. A terrible thought began to form in his mind, a thought that suddenly made all of Julian's strange behavior make sense. He prayed he was wrong. He would rather Julian be tired of him, be in love with someone else, than for this to be the truth. He frantically dialed Julian's number. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. He threw on a jacket and ran out of the house. There were no buses or trains at this hour, so he called a car service, urging the driver to go faster, faster. The 200-mile journey took an hour and a half. He let himself into the apartment with his old key. The smell of blood hit him immediately. Julian was in the bathtub, his head lolled back, an arm draped over the side. A dark red line snaked down from his pale wrist. The water was stained crimson. Leo almost collapsed. He pulled Julian's cold, limp body from the tub. He could feel every one of his ribs under his thin, wet shirt. Scars, old and new, crisscrossed the skin beneath. The sight of them, stark and brutal, broke something inside him. Tears streamed down his face. What had happened to his Julian? He grabbed a towel and pressed it hard against the wound, the fabric quickly turning a dark, saturated red. "You promised you'd take care of me forever," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "How could you do this? Wake up, Julian. Don't leave me." He pleaded with him, his words lost in a torrent of grief. He couldn't remember if he had called an ambulance. Julian's eyelashes fluttered, his lips a pale shade of blue. He looked at Leo, his voice a faint whisper. "Leo, why did you come back?" At the hospital, as Julian was taken into surgery, Leo slumped onto a bench in the hallway, the red light above the operating room door glaring in his eyes. His hands were covered in Julian's dried blood, the sticky feeling a permanent brand on his skin. All the details he had overlooked now came rushing back, each one a separate, agonizing stab of a knife. The supplements Julian had started taking, the white pills in an unmarked bottle. He had claimed they were for his immune system, but Leo now remembered how calm, almost placid, he would be after taking them. They weren't vitamins. They were antidepressants. The scars on his body. He had been hurting himself, fighting his inner demons with physical pain, and hiding it from Leo, terrified of being discovered. His rejection of Leo's touch wasn't disgust. It was fear. His late nights weren't at the office. They were probably at a clinic or a therapist's office. The cologne was to cover the smell of disinfectant. His vacant stares, his weight loss. It all made a terrible, horrifying kind of sense. The darkness in Julian's eyes wasn't the absence of love. It was the despair of a man who was drowning. He had never stopped loving Leo. He was just sick. So sick he had forgotten how to love himself. And through it all, he had tried to protect Leo, to put on a clumsy performance so he wouldn't worry. And Leo, like a fool, had believed him. A woman in a smart pantsuit approached him. It was Dr. Evans, the therapist, from his phone. She explained Julian's condition, her voice low and compassionate. The depression had started months after they were thrown out of their family home. The dosage of his medication had recently been tripled. She had urged Julian to tell Leo everything, but he had refused. He had researched the effects of depression on loved ones and didn't want to drag Leo down with him. He didn't want to be a burden. As he felt himself losing the battle, he had asked for her help to stage a breakup. He would rather Leo hate him than be consumed by his illness. Dr. Evans looked towards the operating room. His condition is more severe than I thought, she said, her voice dropping even lower. Even if he makes it through this, there's a high chance he might try again. But that was okay. Leo would not let him fight this alone anymore. Julian had been his shield against the world for so long. Now it was his turn to be Julian's. He would sit by his side, he would hold his hand, and he would wait with him for the dawn. Even if their love had burned down to ashes, beneath the ashes, he would be there, a steady, constant light. He would love him forever. From the stall in the executive washroom, Julian heard the familiar sneers. Did you hear? Vance's proposal got shot down again. A laugh. Serves him right. He only got this job because he was sleeping with the old boss. That's nothing. He slept with his own stepbrother. That's why his family kicked him out. Fucking queer. Good thing the old man is gone. The new CEO is super conservative. It's only a matter of time before Vance gets the boot. Julian had been hearing versions of this for 4 years. At first, it made him angry. Now he felt nothing. There was no point in defending himself. They would only believe what they wanted to believe. He splashed cold water on his face. The man in the mirror was a stranger, with dark hollows under his eyes and a permanent downward tilt to his mouth. Back at his desk, the rejected proposal glowed on his screen. It was the third one this month. He knew it wasn't about the quality of his work. It was the same reason his name was never on the promotions list, even though his team consistently had the best performance metrics. The official reason was always the same. Julian is a great asset, but we're looking for someone with a more stable image for our management team. Stable was just a polite word for straight. He had worked tirelessly for 4 years, thinking his accomplishments could overcome their prejudice. He was wrong. Before he left for the day, the HR manager called him in. Another client complaint. Inappropriate behavior. The letter was on the desk. Can you please not assign a homosexual to my account? Is your entire company full of deviants? He had thought about quitting, but the Vance family's reach was long. After they were disowned, their story was tabloid fodder for weeks. He knew the family had orchestrated it, making him unemployable. He had washed dishes, worked construction, done things he never imagined he would have to do just to survive. The family was waiting for him to break, to come crawling back. But he wouldn't. Even when he and Leo were living in that damp studio apartment, freezing under a thin blanket, he had never felt miserable. He felt free, but he worried about Leo. His leg had never healed properly, and the dampness was making it worse. He had swallowed his pride and begged his cousin for a job. His cousin, who had once idolized him, now looked down on him with disdain but gave him a chance. He was smarter than the rest of the family. He knew how to give you just enough hope to make the despair even more crushing. Julian knew most of the trouble he faced at work was orchestrated by him. But it was worth it. They were able to move out of the studio. Dr. Evans told him he was sick, that he had been sick for a long time. At first, he didn't believe her. He was with Leo. He was happy. But then the insomnia started. He would drift off in the middle of conversations. Leo would look at him with such worry in his eyes. He would just smile and say he was tired. Leo would hug him, his head tucked under his chin, and tell him to rest. He didn't have the heart to tell him that he had lost his appetite, that he felt like he was wasting away. Then the symptoms got worse. He started smoking. He found himself drawn to the roof of their apartment building. 30 stories up, the people below looked like ants. He would feel the wind tug at his clothes and have the urge to lean forward, just a little, to let go of the heavy weight of his body and just be light. Then his phone would vibrate. A text from Leo. Hey, My latest story sold.
I'm celebrating.
I'm gonna buy you a new shirt. Can you pick up some fried chicken and root beer on your way home? Love you. He would grip the phone, and even though every breath felt like it was filled with lead, he knew he couldn't die. Leo was waiting for him. The visions of himself on the edge of the roof became more frequent. Dr. Evans prescribed him medication. Sometimes it made him dizzy, but at least it kept the suicidal thoughts at bay. He would always take it in his car and wait for the side effects to pass before going inside. He didn't want Leo to know. He didn't want him to worry. Leo had always felt that he was to blame for Julian's hardships, that he had ruined his life. Julian had told him countless times that he loved him, that he didn't regret anything, that he was happy. But Leo still carried the guilt. If he knew about the depression, he would blame himself. He couldn't bear to see that sadness in his eyes. The time it took for the medication's side effects to wear off grew longer. Or maybe his perception of time was just warped. He would sit in his car for hours, lost in a fog. When he came home that night, Leo was sitting in the dark. He said he was looking for inspiration, but Julian could see the lie in his drooping shoulders. He asked if he was tired, offered to hold him. But Julian knew the smell of smoke still clung to him, even under the cologne. He couldn't let him get that close. Leo would know. Leo would worry. He fled to the bathroom, turning on the shower to drown out his thoughts. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, his face a twisted mask of despair, and punched the tiled wall. The pain in his knuckles was a welcome distraction. He took off his shirt. The scars were a grotesque map of his suffering. Dr. Evans had warned him that self-harm could be addictive, but it was the only thing that could temporarily silence the screaming in his head. He turned the water to its coldest setting, trying to wash away the urge to die. When he finally went to their bedroom, Leo was still awake. He asked him to make love. It wasn't that he didn't want to. He couldn't. The medication had destroyed his libido, and he was terrified that Leo would feel the raised, jagged lines on his skin. When Leo reached for him, his mind went blank. All he could think was, he can't find out. He pushed him away. He saw the hurt in Leo's eyes as he fell. He was a monster. The articles he had read about depression all said the same thing. It was a disease that didn't just destroy the person who had it, but also those closest to them. The thought returned, stronger than ever. Maybe if he died, they would both be free. When Leo asked if he still loved him, he couldn't answer. What was love anymore? Dr. Evans kept telling him to be honest with Leo. Tell him, and then what? Let him spend his life taking care of a mentally ill man, consumed by guilt? He escaped to the guest room. He lay in the dark, counting his heartbeats. 53 per minute. Still beating. Leo's whispered "I love you" from the kitchen the next morning almost made him break down. He had lost his sense of taste due to the medication. He was just glad he hadn't messed up the breakfast. Dr. Evans's words echoed in his mind. Hiding your illness will hurt the people who love you more. He knew Leo suspected something. Maybe he had a right to know. He said his name, but when he saw the guilt flash across Leo's face, he couldn't go through with it. He couldn't add to his burden. He would just have to try harder to get better, to love him properly. His mother was dying. He had once been her greatest pride. Now he was her deepest shame. They asked him if he regretted it. He said he did. He said it for her so she could die in peace. But he also said it for himself. He didn't regret loving Leo. He regretted that he was too weak to withstand the pressure of the world. He was a broken man. How could he protect Leo if he couldn't even protect himself? If he died, Leo would be sad, would feel guilty. He didn't know why, but he desperately wanted his mother's forgiveness, a last piece of driftwood in a raging river. But she died hating him. Now, when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the look in her eyes as she told him to die. He would soon. Dr. Evans said that death wasn't an escape, that it would only drag the people who loved him into hell. But the only person who loved him was Leo. He was the spring that had grown out of all his pain. He deserved a better life, not a life spent with a decaying, hopeless man. So he had to push him away. His life was still long. He had the whole world in front of him. The pain of a breakup would fade. Be safe, Leo. Goodbye. After Leo left, he contacted Alex, one of Leo's few friends. He introduced himself as Leo's brother, though he was sure Alex knew who he really was. He offered him money to go and stay with Leo for a while. Alex went, but he refused the money. Every night, he would send Julian pictures of Leo. Slowly, he started to see Leo smile again. That was good. Alex was curious why they had broken up when it was so clear they still cared about each other. Julian was glad he never asked. He wouldn't have known how to answer. Eventually, Leo settled down in a small town. On the winter solstice, he posted about starting a new chapter. Julian was happy for him. Now he could leave without any regrets. But as he looked at the post, tears blurred his vision. He lay down in the bathtub and watched the water turn red. His short life flashed before his eyes. The day he met Leo was the first day he truly felt alive. Leo saw him, loved him, not for his name or his inheritance, but for who he was. With Leo, he could just be himself. My Leo, my spring. May you flourish in the ashes. Just as his consciousness began to fade, he thought he heard the door burst open. Thought he heard Leo screaming his name. What a shame, he thought. I scared him in the end. He woke up in a hospital bed. Leo was sitting there watching him. He wasn't angry that Julian had hidden the truth. Instead, he blamed himself for not paying closer attention. He took Julian's hand. This isn't just your illness, he said. It's a battle we have to fight together. Don't worry, my love. I'll be with you every step of the way. Our story is not over. The fire is not out. In the ashes, we will rise again.